8 months pregnant, and the photos of my husband kissing another woman exploded across Silicon Valley overnight. 20 years of marriage, gone in a single headline. But here's what he didn't know. I'm not just a housewife. I'm an heiress to a multi-billion-dollar empire. And the prenup he made me sign, it's about to destroy him. This isn't just a story about betrayal. It's about the most calculated revenge in corporate history. Stay until the end, because the twist will leave you speechless. And hey, if you love stories of power, betrayal, and ultimate payback, hit that like button, drop a comment, share this with your friends, and subscribe for more unbelievable true stories. The marble kitchen counter vibrated with the insistent buzzing of Catherine Manning's phone. She set down her herbal tea, one hand resting protectively on her 8 months pregnant belly, and reached for the device. Her sister Rachel's name flashed on the screen. Catherine, you need to see this. Rachel's voice trembled through the speakerphone, each word tight with barely controlled emotion. Rachel, it's 7 in the morning. What's wrong? Catherine asked, though something in her sister's tone made her stomach clench with premonition. Check your email. I just sent you something. Kathy, I'm so sorry. Catherine's fingers moved across her phone screen with practiced efficiency. The email loaded slowly, her mansion's Wi-Fi choosing this moment to lag. When the images finally appeared, the ceramic mug slipped from her other hand, shattering against the Italian tile floor with a sound that seemed to echo through the empty house. There, in high resolution, was her husband David, his arms wrapped around Jessica Carter, the 28-year-old HR director at his company. Their lips were pressed together in what was clearly not a professional interaction. The timestamp showed last night's company gala, the one David had said spouses weren't invited to attend. Catherine, are you there? Rachel's voice sounded distant, tinny through the phone speaker. Catherine stared at the screen, her mind struggling to process what her eyes were seeing. 20 years of marriage reduced to a viral photo spreading through Silicon Valley's gossip networks. Her hand trembled as she swiped to the next image, David's hand on Jessica's lower back. Jessica's face turned up to his with adoration, the conference room table behind them. I'm here, Catherine finally managed, her voice steady despite the trembling in her hands. The baby kicked, as if sensing her distress. That absolute bastard, Rachel spat. 8 months pregnant. Kathy, you're 8 months pregnant with his child, and he's... I know what he's doing, Catherine interrupted, her tone measured, controlled. She'd learned long ago that control was power, a lesson from her father that she'd never forgotten. She picked up her primary phone, the one David knew about, and dialed his number. It rang once, twice, 3 times before going to voicemail. His professional message played, the one she'd heard him record in this very kitchen 6 months ago, talking about building their future together. David, please call me immediately, she said after the beep, surprised at how calm she sounded. We need to discuss the photos from last night's gala. The grandfather clock in the hallway chimed the quarter hour, its deep resonance filling the silence. Outside, she could hear the pool filter humming its morning rhythm, the sound of their neighbor's gardener starting his leaf blower. Everything sounded exactly as it had yesterday morning, and the morning before that, stretching back through 2 decades of carefully constructed normalcy. Catherine walked carefully around the broken mug, her designer slippers crunching on ceramic shards. She moved to the windows overlooking their backyard, the one where they'd hosted countless barbecues, where David had pushed her on the swing he'd installed when they'd first started trying for children 15 years ago. Her phone buzzed. David's response was a text, not a call, in meetings all morning. We'll call later, Catherine almost laughing. After 20 years, she knew his patterns. In meetings was David speak for buying time to construct his story. She'd watched him do it with business partners, with employees who'd discovered discrepancies, with anyone who threatened the perfect image of David Manning, self-made millionaire and CEO of Manning Technologies. What David didn't know, what he'd never known, was that Catherine had been watching him play these games from the beginning, because Catherine Manning had a secret of her own, one she'd kept for their entire marriage. Her maiden name wasn't Murphy, as she'd told him when they'd met at Stanford. It was Sullivan. Catherine Sullivan, daughter of Thomas Sullivan, the tech billionaire who'd built an empire before his death 5 years ago. She'd hidden it all the trust fund worth $500 million, the connections to every major player in Silicon Valley, the education at Swiss finishing schools before Stanford. She'd wanted to be loved for herself, not her fortune. She'd wanted a marriage built on partnership, not power. Her phone rang again. This time it was David. "Kate, listen, it's not what it looks like," he said immediately, using that CEO voice he employed for damage control with investors. "You're kissing Jessica Carter at your company party while I'm home carrying your child," Catherine stated simply. "What exactly should it look like?" David. It was a moment of celebration. We just closed the Singapore deal. Emotions were high. Champagne was flowing. "Stop!" Catherine interrupted. "Just stop. Come home. We need to talk in person." "I can't right now. The board meeting." "David." Her voice carried a note he'd never heard before, something that made him pause mid-excuse. "Come home now, or I'll have this conversation with you through my lawyer." The silence stretched between them, filled with 20 years of accumulated moments, their first date at a campus coffee shop, their wedding in her parents' backyard. He'd never questioned why her family was so small, so carefully curated, the years of fertility treatments, the joy when she'd finally gotten pregnant at 42. "I'll be there in an hour," he said finally. Catherine ended the call and immediately dialed another number, one she'd kept in her phone under emergency cleaning service. "Eleanor Fitzgerald's office," came the crisp British accent of her secret family attorney. "Eleanor, it's Catherine Sullivan. I need you to pull the files we discussed." "Oh, my dear." Eleanor's voice softened with understanding. "He's finally shown his true colors. Has he? The entire city has seen his true colors. The photos are everywhere. I'll have everything ready within the hour. Catherine, are you certain you want to proceed? Once we begin, David Manning learns who he really married," Catherine said, steel in her voice. "And the prenup he insisted I sign becomes the instrument of his own destruction." She heard Eleanor's satisfied chuckle. "Page 47 was always my favorite part of that document. The infidelity clause he never bothered to read." Catherine touched her belly, feeling her daughter kick again. 20 years, Eleanor. I gave him 20 years to be the man he pretended to be. And now, my dear, you get to be the woman you always were." After ending the call, Catherine walked slowly upstairs to their bedroom, her bedroom now. She supposed. The California king bed was still unmade on David's side, his pillow bearing the indent of his head from 2 nights ago. The last time he'd come home, his closet door stood open, revealing rows of designer suits she'd helped him pick, ties she'd given him for birthdays and Christ days, the cufflinks that had belonged to her real father. She sat on her side of the bed and opened the hidden panel in her nightstand, pulling out a photograph she hadn't looked at in years. It showed her with her father at her real graduation from Stanford, not the scaled-down ceremony she'd arranged for David to attend. Thomas Sullivan stood beside her, his arm around her shoulders, pride radiating from his weathered face. "Never let them see your cards until you're ready to win everything, Katie," he'd told her that day. "But when you're ready, play to win." The front door opened downstairs, David's voice calling out, "Catherine, Kate." She slipped the photo back into its hiding place and stood, smoothing her maternity dress. 20 years of playing small, of dimming her light, of pretending to be less than she was, all to protect the ego of a man who'd thrown it all away for an HR director with fake eyelashes and a plastic smile. Catherine walked to the top of the stairs and looked down at her husband. He stood in the foyer, his expression already arranged into what he thought was appropriate contrition. He hadn't even bothered to loosen his tie, the power play of keeping his armor on. "Hello, David," she said, her voice carrying clearly through the space. "I think it's time you learned exactly who you married." 3 hours earlier, David Manning had stood at the head of the conference room at Manning Technologies headquarters, his voice resonating with practiced authority as he addressed the board members. "Gentlemen, our quarterly profits have exceeded $50 million, he announced, his Northeast accent clipping each word with precision. "The Singapore merger will push us into the Fortune 1000 by year's end." The door opened with a subtle click, and Jessica Carter entered, her heels announcing her arrival with sharp staccato beats against the hardwood floor. She moved with studied grace, her voice carrying that subtle Valley Girl up-talk that seemed incongruous with her Harvard MBA. "David, we need to discuss the Singapore merger," she said, her hand touching his arm with practiced familiarity. "The partners are waiting for your call." The board members exchanged glances. Everyone knew about David and Jessica. In Silicon Valley's incestuous ecosystem, secrets were currency, and David Manning's affair with his HR director was an open secret worth its weight in stock options. Now, Catherine stood at the top of their marble staircase, watching her husband's face cycle through emotions: surprise, calculation, and finally a decision to double down on his chosen narrative. "Kate, you're being hormonal," David said, ascending the stairs slowly. "The pregnancy has you seeing things that aren't there." Catherine almost admired his audacity. Even with photographic evidence spreading through social media like wildfire, he was attempting to gaslight her. She remained perfectly still as he approached, letting him think he was in control. "20 years ago," Catherine said softly, "I met a struggling MBA student in a Stanford coffee shop. He was brilliant, ambitious, and completely broke. He couldn't even afford the latte he'd ordered." David's jaw tightened. He hated being reminded of his humble beginnings. "I paid for that latte," Catherine continued. "And the next one. And the dinner after that. You thought I was just another graduate student, living off student loans and ramen noodles? What's your point, Catherine? That I owe you for a few dates 20 years ago?" "My point," Catherine said, descending the stairs with careful grace, "is that you never asked the right questions, never wondered why a graduate student could afford designer clothes she claimed were thrift store finds, never questioned how I had connections that opened doors for your fledgling company." She reached the bottom of the stairs and walked past him toward the living room, the one she'd decorated with pieces he thought were from Pottery Barn, but were actually custom imports from Italian designers. "I used my mother's maiden name at Stanford," Catherine said, settling into the cream-colored armchair. "Murphy was simpler than Sullivan, less likely to attract attention." David's face went pale. "Sullivan as in Thomas Sullivan, my father. The man who built Sullivan Enterprises from nothing into a $5 billion empire." Catherine watched the information sink in, watched him recalculate 20 years of marriage. "The empire I stand to inherit, have inherited, actually, since his death 5 years ago." "That's impossible," David said, but his voice lacked conviction. She could see him reviewing memories, recontextualizing moments. The investors who'd appeared at crucial moments, the deals that had materialized when his company teetered on bankruptcy, the connections that had elevated Manning Technologies from a garage startup to a major player. "The Hartman deal in year 3, Catherine said calmly. "That wasn't luck, David. That was me calling in a favor from my father's golf partner. The Series B funding that saved the company in year 7. My trust fund, funneled through shell corporations. The government contract that launched you into the big leagues. My godfather sits on the procurement committee." "Itakari," David sank into the opposite chair, his carefully constructed self-image crumbling. "You've been lying to me for 20 years. Catherine laughed, the sound sharp and bitter. "I've been loving you for 20 years, supporting you, building you up while pretending to be less than I was because your ego couldn't handle a wife who was your equal, let alone your superior." "Why?" David asked, and for the first time in years, he sounded genuinely confused. "Why would you hide this? Because I wanted to be loved for who I was, not what I owned." Catherine said simply, "I watched my mother navigate marriage to a powerful man. I saw how money corrupted every relationship my father had. I wanted something real, something true. Her phone buzzed. Rachel had sent another message. The photos are trending. Rocky, Manning scandal is the top hashtag in San Francisco. David pulled out his own phone, his face growing paler as he scrolled through the notifications. The stock price is dropping. Yes, I imagine it is, Catherine said. Investors don't like instability, and a CEO who can't manage his personal life doesn't inspire confidence. You did this, David accused, standing abruptly. You leaked those photos. I was home last night. David, 8 months pregnant, eating takeout Thai food and watching Netflix. Alone. Again. Catherine's voice remained steady. You did this. You and Jessica, in the conference room of the company I helped build, while I sat at home carrying your child. David's phone rang. He looked at the screen and declined the call. It rang again immediately. You should answer that, Catherine suggested. It sounds urgent. David stepped into the hallway to take the call. Catherine could hear his voice, tight with tension, trying to manage the crisis. She pulled out her own phone and texted Eleanor, He's here. Proceed with phase 1. When David returned, his face was thunderous. Someone's calling in our loans. All of them. Sullivan Enterprises is demanding immediate payment. How interesting, Catherine murmured. I wonder why they would do that. You know why? David snapped. This is you. This is your revenge. My revenge. Catherine stood, her hand on her belly. David, I haven't even started. This is simply the natural consequence of your choices. You see, when you insisted on that prenup, you were so focused on protecting your assets from your gold-digging wife that you never read the whole document. She walked to the antique secretary desk and pulled out a folder. Page 47, the infidelity clause. In the event of proven adultery, the cheating party forfeits all claims to shared assets and faces financial penalties equal to 50% of the company's value. David snatched the document, his eyes scanning the page. This is unconscionable. No court would enforce this. California courts are quite progressive about protecting pregnant wives from their narcissistic ex-husbands, Catherine said, emphasizing the last two words, especially when those wives can prove a pattern of financial abuse and deception. Financial abuse, I've given you everything. You've given me an allowance from money I secretly provided, Catherine corrected. You've controlled every aspect of our finances while building your company with my inheritance. That's textbook financial abuse. David. His phone was ringing again and again. The outside world was demanding his attention, his explanation, his leadership. But David Manning, CEO and Millionaire, stood frozen in his living room, watching his carefully constructed life crumble. I want a divorce, he said suddenly, as if the words were a power play, a way to regain control. Catherine smiled. Oh, David, that's the first intelligent thing you've said all morning. Eleanor will send over the papers this afternoon. I'll fight you, he threatened. I'll take everything. No court will give you anything when they learn about your deception. My deception. Catherine walked closer to him, close enough that he could see the steel in her eyes he'd never noticed before. I hid my maiden name. You hid an affair. I protected your ego. You betrayed our marriage. I don't think the courts will have trouble determining who the villain is in this story. The doorbell rang. They both turned toward the sound. That would be Eleanor, Catherine said. She's eager to discuss the divorce settlement, all $200 million of it. Eleanor Fitzgerald entered the Manning residence with the bearing of British royalty, her silver hair perfectly coiffed, her suit impeccable despite the early hour. She carried a leather briefcase that probably cost more than most people's monthly mortgage, and her eyes swept over David with the kind of disdain typically reserved for something unfortunate on the bottom of one's shoe. Mr. Bobs Manning, she said, her crisp accent making his name sound like an insult. How unfortunate to finally meet you under these circumstances. Who the hell are you? David demanded, his composure cracking. Eleanor Fitzgerald, senior partner at Fitzgerald, Stone and Associates. I've been managing the Sullivan family's legal affairs for 30 years. She set her briefcase on the coffee table with deliberate precision. I've also been maintaining a rather comprehensive file on you, Mr. Manning, at Catherine's request. You've been spying on me. David turned to Catherine, his face flushed with anger. Not spying, Eleanor corrected. Documenting. There's a significant legal difference. Catherine asked me to maintain records in case they were ever needed. It seems that day has arrived. She pulled out a tablet and began scrolling through files. Shall we review January 15th? Dinner with Jessica Carter at Chez Laurent. Charged to the company card but listed as a client meeting. January 28th. Weekend in Napa. Same companion. Same fraudulent expense report. February 14th, Valentine's Day. How trite, a particularly expensive bracelet from Tiffany's. Also somehow a business expense. With each date, David's face grew paler. Catherine watched from her chair, one hand resting on her belly, feeling her daughter respond to the tension in the room with increased movement. March 3rd, Eleanor continued. The first time you told Jessica you loved her, we have the text messages. March 20th, when you promised her you'd leave your wife after the baby was born. April 2nd. Stop, David said weakly. How do you have any of this, Mr. Manning? You used company devices for your personal communications. Company devices that, according to the enterprise agreement, can be monitored for appropriate use. Catherine owns 51% of that company, though you never knew it. She has every legal right to access those records. Rachel entered through the front door without knocking, carrying a tray of coffee and looking like an avenging angel in designer jeans. Kathy, I brought reinforcements. Decaf for you. Obviously, extra strong for everyone else. We're going to need it. She set the tray down and glared at David. You absolute bastard. Do you have any idea what you've thrown away? Rachel, this doesn't concern you, David said, attempting to regain some authority. My pregnant sister doesn't concern me, Rachel's voice rose. The man who built his entire millionaire empire on her money, telling her she's nothing, doesn't concern me. Rachel, Catherine said softly, and her sister stopped mid-tirade. They'd always had that connection, that ability to communicate without words. Eleanor cleared her throat. Shall we discuss the prenuptial agreement, Mr. Manning? I assume you have your copy. I need to call my lawyer, David said. By all means, Eleanor said, gesturing to his phone. Though I should warn you that James Whitman is currently in a meeting with 3 other senior partners at his firm, discussing whether representing you might constitute a conflict of interest, given that Sullivan Enterprises is one of their largest clients. David's phone rang before he could dial. He looked at the screen and his expression darkened further. It's Jessica. Answer it, Catherine said. Put it on speaker. I think we should all hear what your girlfriend has to say. David hesitated, then accepted the call. Jessica's voice filled the room, high and panicked. David! Oh my God, David! What's happening? The photos are everywhere. My Instagram is blowing up. This is, so bad for my brand. Jessica, calm down. Calm down, David. I'm getting death threats. They're calling me a homewrecker. You said she didn't matter, that the marriage was already over. Catherine and Rachel exchanged glances. Eleanor was recording everything on her tablet. We'll handle this, David said, trying to sound reassuring. Just stay calm and don't talk to anyone. Handle it how David. If this affects my position at the company, your position is secure. Is it? Because I'm hearing rumors that your wife owns the company. Is that true? David's silence was answer enough. Jessica's voice rose to a shriek. You told me you built that company yourself. You said she was just some housewife who didn't understand your vision. David, if you've been lying to me. We'll discuss this later, David said firmly and ended the call. Some housewife, Rachel muttered. Kathy, remember what Dad always said? Never let them see your cards until you're ready to win everything. Catherine and Rachel said in unison. Eleanor pulled out a thick document from her briefcase. Now, about that prenup. Mr. Manning, you insisted on this agreement to protect your assets. You had your lawyer draft it. You presented it to Catherine 2 weeks before the wedding with an ultimatum: sign it or the wedding was off. Standard practice, David said defensively. I had to protect what I was building. Indeed, and Catherine signed it after making a few small additions that your lawyer approved without, apparently, reading them carefully. Eleanor smiled, a sharp expression that reminded Catherine of a shark sensing blood. Page 47, subsection C. Would you like me to read it aloud? She didn't wait for his response. In the event that either party commits adultery, defined as intimate physical or emotional relationships outside the marriage, the offending party shall forfeit all claims to marital assets and pay penalties equal to 50% of their net worth at the time of divorce, including all holdings, stock options, and business interests. That's not enforceable, David said weakly. Oh, but it is. You see, you insisted on making this prenup ironclad. You wanted to ensure it couldn't be challenged. Your lawyer added language making it binding under all circumstances. You literally trapped yourself. Mr. Manning, Catherine stood and walked to the window, looking out at the garden she'd cultivated for 20 years. David, do you remember our 5th anniversary? You gave me that little ceramic bird, apologizing that you couldn't afford more. What does that have to do with anything? I have the Cartier necklace you were actually going to give me, before you decided I wasn't worth it. I found the receipt in your jacket. You returned it and bought the ceramic bird from a street vendor instead. You kept the difference, $30,000, and used it to wine and dine potential investors. She turned to face him. Every anniversary, every birthday, every Christmas, you did the same thing. You'd budget for an appropriate gift, then give me something small and pocket the rest. 20 years of financial manipulation, all documented. You're twisting everything, David protested. I was building our future. You were building your future, Catherine corrected, using my money, my connections, and my silence. Well, I'm done being silent. Eleanor pulled out another document. This is the filing for divorce on grounds of adultery and financial abuse. The evidence is overwhelming and indisputable. With the prenup you insisted upon, you're looking at walking away with essentially nothing. Nothing. I built that company with my client's money, Eleanor said smoothly. Every major investment, every crucial influx of capital came from Sullivan Family Trusts. We have the paper trail. Manning Technologies is built on Sullivan money, which makes it a Sullivan asset. David's phone was ringing constantly now. Board members, investors, employees, everyone wanting answers he didn't have. I need time to think, he said desperately. You've had 20 years, Catherine said quietly. That's more than enough time. Rachel moved to stand beside her sister, a united front of Sullivan women. Kathy, tell him about the baby. David's head snapped up. What about the baby? She'll be born a Sullivan, Catherine said, her hand protective over her belly. Victoria Thomas Sullivan. She'll carry my father's name, my family's legacy. You'll have visitation rights, of course, pending court approval and child support payments. Child support, David laughed bitterly. With what money you're taking everything? You're an intelligent man. David, I'm sure you'll figure something out. Maybe Jessica can support you. Oh, wait, Catherine paused. She was only interested in your money and power, wasn't she? How inconvenient. Eleanor began packing up her briefcase. Mr. Manning, you have 48 hours to vacate the premises. This house is in Catherine's name, a gift from her father that she never told you about. Your belongings will be packed and sent to a storage facility. The access codes to the office have already been changed. You can't lock me out of my own company. It's not your company, Eleanor said simply. It never was. You were just the face of it, the figurehead Catherine allowed to play CEO while she pulled the strings from behind the scenes. David stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the hardwood floor. This isn't over. I'll fight this. I'll destroy you in court. With what resources? Eleanor asked mildly. Your assets are frozen pending the divorce proceedings. Your credit cards have been canceled. They were all in Catherine's name anyway. Your car is a company vehicle, which has already been recalled. You have exactly what's in your wallet right now. Mr. Manning, I hope it's enough for a hotel room. The silence that followed was deafening. David looked around the room at his wife of 20 years, her sister who'd never liked him, the lawyer who just eviscerated his life and seemed to deflate. Kate, he said, his voice small. 20 years. Doesn't that mean anything? Catherine looked at him for a long moment. This man she'd loved, supported, diminished herself for. It meant everything to me. David, that's the difference between us. Now please leave. Your girlfriend is waiting for an explanation, and I need to rest. Stress isn't good for the baby. David had been gone for exactly 3 hours when Catherine's phone buzzed with a saved voicemail notification from her cloud backup, a message from 3 months ago that she'd never heard, automatically recorded by the smart home system she'd installed without David's knowledge. Jessica, last night was incredible. David's voice purred through the speaker. Catherine suspects nothing. She's too wrapped up in the pregnancy to notice I'm never home. After the baby's born and I've secured the Singapore deal, we'll make our move. I'll divorce her, take half of everything. She's got more family money than she lets on. I'm sure of it, and we'll build our empire together. Rachel, who was still there making tea, gasped. He's been planning this for months. Longer, probably, Catherine said calmly, saving the recording to multiple secure servers. Good, that makes what I'm about to do easier. She picked up her phone and made a call that was 20 years overdue. Marcus Cooper, she said when the phone was answered. This is Catherine Sullivan. Yes, Thomas's daughter. It's time to activate the succession plan. Within an hour, the Sullivan family's war room had assembled in downtown San Francisco. The office occupied the entire top floor of a building David passed every day, never knowing his wife owned it. Marcus Cooper, who bore no relation to Jessica despite sharing a surname, stood at the head of a conference table that could seat 30. Mrs. Manning, excuse me, Ms. Sullivan, Marcus corrected himself, his voice carrying the precise diction of someone who'd learned English at Oxford. Your father's empire awaits your command. We've been maintaining everything in trust, as per his instructions. The room began filling with Silicon Valley titans, people David would have killed to have a meeting with, all here at Catherine's summons. Margaret Stone entered, her silver hair and sharp suit making her look like the apex predator she was in the business world. Catherine Sullivan, Margaret said warmly, embracing her. Your father would be so proud. When he told me his daughter was hiding in plain sight, playing the supportive wife, I thought he was joking. He understood, Catherine said. He knew I needed to learn who people really were when they didn't know who I was. And what did you learn? Margaret asked. That most people are exactly who they show you they are. We just choose not to see it. Marcus cleared his throat. Shall we discuss Manning Technologies? Your husband, excuse me, your soon-to-be ex-husband, is currently at the Four Seasons, trying to convince investors not to pull out. He's failing spectacularly. A screen descended from the ceiling, showing real-time stock prices. Manning Technologies was down 23% and falling. How much would it take to acquire 51%? Catherine asked. At current prices, approximately $75 million, Marcus replied. Pocket change for Sullivan Enterprises. Do it, Catherine said without hesitation. But slowly. I don't want him to know it's us until it's too late. Her phone rang. David's number. Put him on speaker, Margaret suggested with a predatory smile. Catherine, what have you done? David's voice was ragged, desperate. Someone's buying up shares. The board is panicking. The market responds to scandal. David, you know that. You've used it to your advantage before. destroying competitors with leaked information. How does it feel to be on the other side? This is different. This is our life, our company, my company, Catherine corrected. Built with my money, my connections, my strategic planning that you took credit for. Every major deal you celebrated, David, I orchestrated it. The Patterson contract, I played golf with Patterson's wife. The government defense contract, my godfather is a general. The Singapore merger you're so proud of, I've been laying the groundwork for 2 years. Silence from David's end. Then, you're lying, Catherine laughed. Marcus, pull up the email records. The screen changed to show a series of emails, Catherine's private account, sending strategic advice to David's work email, but routed through dummy accounts so he never knew the source. Remember your mysterious advisor? Deep thought, too, Catherine asked. The one who always seemed to know exactly what move to make. Hello. David, it's been me all along. That's impossible. Deep thought 42 knew things about our competitors that only someone with Sullivan resources could know. Yes. Margaret leaned toward the phone. Mr. Manning, this is Margaret Stone. You might recognize my name from the Fortune 500 list. I'm calling an emergency board meeting for Manning Technologies tomorrow morning. As a new majority shareholder, I'll be nominating Catherine Sullivan as CEO. I suspect the vote will be unanimous. The call ended with David's strangled protest cut short. Catherine turned to the assembled team. I want a complete audit of Manning Technologies. Every deal, every contract, every employee. Jessica Carter is to be terminated for cause she's been embezzling with David's help, hiding personal expenses as business costs. Already documented, Eleanor said, entering the war room with a satisfied expression. Ms. Chen has been quite careless. She's been selling company information to competitors, thinking she was being clever. We have evidence of at least 15 instances of corporate espionage. Send it to the FBI, Catherine said. Let them handle her. Her phone buzzed with a text from David. You've become cruel. She showed it to Rachel, who snorted. You should respond. No, I've become visible. Instead, Catherine typed, I've become exactly who I always was. You just never bothered to look. Marcus pulled up another screen. Your father's full estate, Ms. Sullivan. You've been living on less than 1% of your available resources? The numbers were staggering. Properties in 12 countries, investment portfolios worth billions, art collections, patents, a biotech company developing cancer treatments, a renewable energy firm, stakes in 3 major airlines. He built all this, Rachel asked, awestruck. He built it for the next generation, Catherine said, touching her belly. For Victoria. For the grandchildren he'd never meet but knew would come. Speaking of your daughter, Margaret said, we should discuss her future. With the Sullivan Trust and what we're about to acquire from Manning Technologies, she'll be one of the wealthiest children in America. She'll also be educated about it, Catherine said firmly. No hiding, no pretending to be less than she is. She'll know her worth from day one. Marcus's assistant entered, whispered something in his ear. He smiled broadly. It's done. We own 51% of Manning Technologies. Congratulations, Miss Sullivan. You're now the majority owner of your ex-husband's company. Catherine didn't celebrate. She simply nodded, as if acquiring a multi-million-dollar company was an everyday occurrence. In her father's world, her world now it was, schedule the board meeting for 9 a.m. tomorrow, she instructed. Have security ready in case David tries to cause a scene, and Marcus start the paperwork to rebrand. Sullivan Manning Technologies has a nice ring to it. Don't you think? The next morning, Catherine walked into Chez Laurent at precisely noon, wearing a Caroline Herrera dress that had been hanging in her closet for 3 years. Tags still on because David had said it was too much for a housewife. Her pregnancy gave her a regal bearing, and heads turned as she moved through the restaurant. David and Jessica sat at a corner table, champagne flutes in hand, apparently celebrating despite the chaos surrounding them. Catherine had known they'd be here. David was nothing if not predictable, and this was where he'd brought all his mistresses over the years. Yes, mistresses, plural. Jessica was just the latest in a long line Catherine had documented, but never confronted him about. "Celebrating already?" Catherine asked, her voice carrying across the suddenly silent restaurant. David jerked to his feet, nearly knocking over his champagne. "Kate, what are you doing here?" "Having lunch," Catherine said simply. "This is a public restaurant. David, though I'm surprised you can afford it, given your current financial situation." Jessica giggled nervously, that irritating uptalk making every statement a question. "This is, like, super awkward." "Awkward?" Catherine turned her attention to the younger woman, taking in the designer clothes that Catherine's money had ultimately paid for. "Jessica, did David mention his company is built on my money?" The giggling stopped. "What? Every victory you celebrated with him? Every bonus you received funded by my inheritance? You're wearing a dress my trust fund paid for, sitting in a restaurant my family's money keeps afloat, toasting with champagne that should technically be mine." David stepped forward. "Kate, not here. You're making a scene." "No, David. You made the scene when you brought your mistress to our anniversary restaurant." Catherine's voice never rose, but it commanded attention. Every diner in the restaurant was watching, phones discreetly recording. Jessica's face was cycling through emotions: confusion, anger, fear. "David, what does she mean? Her money?" "The struggling MBA student I married needed startup capital," Catherine explained patiently, as if talking to a child. "He needed connections, introductions, strategic advice. I provided all of it, secretly, letting him take the credit because his ego couldn't handle a wife who was smarter and wealthier than he was." "You told me she was just a housewife." Jessica's voice rose, the Valley Girl affectation slipping to reveal something harder underneath. "I am a housewife," Catherine said. "I'm also an heiress, a strategic genius, and as of this morning, the majority owner of Manning Technologies." "Surprise." David grabbed Jessica's arm. "We're leaving." "No," Jessica said, yanking free. "I want to hear this." "David, is she telling the truth?" Catherine pulled out her phone and showed Jessica the Bloomberg article that had just gone live. "Sullivan heiress emerges from shadows, takes control of Manning Technologies." Jessica read it, her face growing paler with each word. "You lied to me. You said you were getting billions in the divorce settlement. You said she was nothing. Nobody." "I didn't know," David started. "You didn't know?" Jessica laughed, high and hysterical. "You were married for 20 years and didn't know your wife was worth $500 million. $500 million was just the trust fund," Catherine corrected. "With my father's full estate, it's closer to $2 billion. Jessica stood so fast her chair tipped over. "You told me we'd be rich. You told me we'd build an empire together. You're nothing but a fraud. David." A pathetic, narcissistic ex-husband who destroyed his family for what? For someone who was only interested in your money? The irony wasn't lost on anyone listening. "Jessica, baby, we can work through this." David reached for her. Jessica slapped his hand away. "Don't touch me. My lawyer will be in contact. Breach of promise, emotional distress, fraudulent misrepresentation. I'll take whatever you have left after she's done with you." She grabbed her purse and stalked toward the exit, then paused beside Catherine. "For what it's worth, I didn't know you were pregnant when it started. He told me you were separated." "I know," Catherine said quietly. "I have the emails where you asked him about his wife, and he lied to you too. You're victim number 2 in this story. Jessica, the only difference is you chose to continue once you knew the truth." Jessica's face crumpled for a moment, showing the 28-year-old girl beneath the predatory exterior. Then she straightened, lifted her chin, and walked out. David stood alone at the table, every eye in the restaurant on him. "Are you happy now?" he asked Catherine. "You've ruined everything. I've revealed everything. Catherine corrected. There's a significant difference. You ruined it all by yourself. She turned to leave, then paused. Oh, David, your belongings are at the Four Seasons. All except the cufflinks. Those belong to my father. I'll be keeping them for our daughter. As she walked out, she heard the maitre d' approach David. Sir, your credit card was declined. How would you like to handle the check? The last sound she heard was David's desperate voice. There must be some mistake. Run it again. There was no mistake. Eleanor had been thorough. Catherine sat in Dr. Martinez's office, the ultrasound gel cold on her belly as the doctor moved the wand across her skin. On the screen, Victoria moved, her tiny fist clenched near her face. The baby is perfect, Dr. Martinez said gently, her voice carrying the soft cadence of someone who'd delivered difficult news too many times. But your stress levels concern me. Catherine, your blood pressure is elevated. It's been a difficult week, Catherine admitted, watching her daughter on the screen. I saw the news, Dr. Martinez said carefully. I want you to know that many of my patients have sat in that chair alone when they plan to have a partner. You're not the first, and you won't be the last. Catherine felt tears threaten for the first time since discovering David's affair. Every woman who's been pregnant knows this moment, she said softly. Sitting in that chair alone, watching your baby on the screen, wondering how you got here. But not every woman has your strength, Dr. Martinez said, or your resources. This little girl is lucky to have you. Catherine's phone buzzed. She put it on silent, but the screen showed 17 missed calls from various media outlets. The story had gone viral not just in Silicon Valley, but nationally. The billionaire heiress who'd hidden her identity for love, only to be betrayed by her narcissistic ex-husband, was apparently the story America needed right now. After the appointment, Catherine sat in her car in the parking garage, finally answering one of the calls. Mrs. Miss Sullivan. Mark Thompson from TechCrunch was persistently professional. I'd love to get your side of the story. My side, Catherine laughed. Mr. Thompson, there aren't sides to truth. There's just truth. Why hide your identity for 2 decades? Catherine thought about how to answer. Have you ever been loved, Mr. Thompson? Really loved, for exactly who you are, not what you can provide. Yes. Then you're luckier than most. I wanted that. I wanted to be chosen for myself, not my bank account. So I became Catherine Murphy, grad student, nobody special, and for a while it worked. But David Manning built his company on your money. David Manning built his company on the myth of the self-made millionaire. It's a compelling story, the genius entrepreneur who started with nothing. Much more compelling than rich wife bankrolls husband's ego project. That's harsh. That's honest. Print this. Mr. Thompson, I spent 20 years making myself smaller so my husband could feel bigger. I'm done with that now. She ended the call and drove to the nearest Starbucks, needing normalcy, needing to be around people who didn't know or care who she was. She wore a baseball cap and sunglasses, her pregnant belly hidden under a loose sweatshirt. That's when she heard Jessica's voice from the corner table. David's ex is totally psycho, Jessica was saying to a group of women Catherine recognized as other tech company HR directors. She's like claiming she's some heiress now. Isn't she pregnant, though? One of them asked. That's her problem, Jessica said with a cruel laugh. David wants a DNA test anyway. He thinks she might have been cheating too, trying to baby trap him. Catherine pulled out her phone and hit record. But the Bloomberg article, another woman started. Please, Jessica interrupted. Anyone can fake documents. She's just a bitter housewife having a midlife crisis. She'll be lucky if David doesn't sue her for defamation. What about the prenup? David's lawyers are going to destroy it. She'll get nothing. Maybe some minimal child support, but David's already moving assets offshore. She'll be lucky to get $1,000 a month. Catherine recorded for 5 more minutes, capturing Jessica's lies, her admission that David was hiding assets, her casual cruelty about the baby. Then she sent the recording to Eleanor with a simple message: defamation suit, today. Within 3 hours, Jessica Carter was served with papers at her desk at Manning Technologies, her former desk. As it turned out, since Catherine had terminated her that morning for corporate espionage, social media exploded. Team Catherine started trending. Women from around the world shared their own stories of financial abuse, of making themselves smaller for insecure men, of midlife transformations that came from finally choosing themselves. Catherine read the messages in her home office, her real office, the one behind the hidden panel in what David had thought was a linen closet. Thousands of women saying "me too," not about assault, but about the slow erosion of self that came from loving a narcissistic partner. Her phone rang. Margaret Stone. "The board meeting is tomorrow," Margaret said. "David's been calling board members all day, trying to rally support. He's failing spectacularly." "Let him try," Catherine said. "The more he fights, the worse he looks. You know he'll show up tomorrow. I'm counting on it. Have security ready, but don't stop him unless he becomes violent. I want everyone to see exactly who David Manning really is." That night, Catherine stood in Victoria's nursery, the one she'd decorated alone while David was on business trips with Jessica. She'd painted it soft yellow, not knowing if she was having a boy or girl, wanting to be surprised. "Your grandfather would have loved you," she told her belly. "He would have taught you what he taught me, that power isn't about money. It's about knowing your worth and never letting anyone convince you it's less than it is." The baby kicked, strong and insistent. "That's my girl," Catherine whispered. "Strong like your mama. Stronger. Hopefully, you won't have to hide who you are. Not ever." The restraining order was granted at 10 a.m. By 2 a.m. the next morning, Catherine's new security system was screaming alerts through the house. She checked the camera feed from her phone, unsurprised to see David at the gate, clearly drunk, shouting into the intercom. "Kate, please, we can work this out." His voice slurred through the speaker. 20 years, baby. Remember Santa Barbara. Remember our wedding." Catherine didn't respond. She simply started recording. "I know you're there," David continued. "I can see your bedroom light. Kate, Jessica means nothing. You're my wife. You're carrying my child." Rachel's car pulled up behind David's Uber. He'd lost his car privileges along with everything else. Catherine watched her sister get out, phone already to her ear, presumably calling the police. "You mean now that you know I'm worth $500 million? You want to work it out," Catherine finally said through the intercom, making sure the recording caught her calm response. "That's not Kate. I loved you before I knew about the money. You loved who you thought I was, and nobody you could control, manipulate, diminish. You loved having someone who would make you feel like a big man, a millionaire entrepreneur genius. You never loved me. David, you loved the mirror I held up for you." "That's not true." Rachel had reached the gate now. "David, you're violating the restraining order. The police are on their way. This is none of your business." "Rachel, my pregnant sister is my business. My sister who you cheated on, humiliated, and are now harassing at 2 in the morning is very much my business." The police arrived within minutes, lights flashing, but no sirens. This was Palo Alto, after all, where even arrests were discreet. "Mr. Manning," the officer said, "you need to come with us." "This is my house," David shouted. "That's my wife. I have rights." "According to this restraining order, you don't," the officer said patiently. "Sir, you can come quietly, or we can arrest you. Your choice." Catherine watched David crumble, all his CEO bravado evaporating. He went with the officers, but not before shouting one last time, "You'll regret this, Catherine." The next morning, the attempted violation was all over the news. The security footage had somehow been leaked. Catherine suspected Rachel but didn't ask. David Manning, fallen tech CEO, drunk and desperate at his pregnant ex-wife's gate, became the meme of the day. Jessica struck while he was down. Her lawsuit hit the news cycle by noon: breach of promise, emotional distress, sexual harassment. She was claiming David had promised to divorce his wife and marry her, promising her an executive position and a share of his billions. "The vultures are circling," Eleanor told Catherine over lunch. "Jessica's hired Armstrong and Associates. They're good. Let them fight over the corpse," Catherine said. "There's nothing left anyway." The board meeting was scheduled for 3 p.m. Catherine arrived at 2:30, walking into Manning Technologies, her company now with the confidence of someone who belonged there. Employees stared as she passed, some with admiration, others with fear. David was already in the boardroom, his cheap suit a far cry from his usual designer attire. He'd clearly slept poorly, maybe not at all, and his hands shook as he gripped his coffee cup. "Gentlemen," Catherine said, taking the CEO's chair without hesitation. "Thank you for coming." "You can't sit there," David said immediately. "I own 51% of this company. I can sit wherever I please." She opened her laptop, pulling up the presentation she'd prepared. "Now, shall we discuss the future of Sullivan Manning Technologies? That's not the company name. It will be after we vote." Catherine smiled at the board members, most of whom she'd known for years without them realizing it. "Gentlemen, you've all benefited from the strategic decisions that built this company. What you didn't know was that those decisions came from me, not Mr. Manning." She clicked through slides showing the email trails, the investment patterns, the connections that had made every major deal possible. "This is fabricated," David insisted, but his voice lacked conviction. "Mr. Yamamoto," Catherine addressed one of the board members, "do you remember the Tokyo deal 3 years ago? You were surprised when David knew about your daughter's acceptance to Stanford. That information came from me. My sorority sister is the admissions director. I fed David that personal touch to help seal the deal." Yamamoto's eyes widened with understanding. "Mr. Patterson, the government contract that saved this company, my godfather, General Sullivan, put in a word. Mr. Chen, the Singapore merger. David's so proud of. I've been friends with the minister's wife since boarding school." With each revelation, David sank lower in his chair. "The motion before us is simple," Catherine continued. "Remove David Manning as CEO for cause specifically embezzlement, corporate espionage through his relationship with Jessica Carter, and gross mismanagement that led to a 40% drop in stock value." "You caused that drop," David exploded. "No, David, your penis caused that drop. Your inability to keep it in your pants around your HR director caused that drop. Your narcissistic belief that you could betray your pregnant wife without consequences caused that drop." The vote was unanimous. Even David's supposed allies voted against him. "Security will escort you out," Catherine said calmly. "Your personal items have already been packed." David stood slowly, his face a mask of rage. "You've become cruel, Catherine." "No, David, I've become visible. There's a difference." As security led him toward the door, David turned back one last time. "That baby might not even be mine." Catherine laughed, actually laughed. "Oh, David." Still trying to control the narrative. "The baby is yours. The DNA test you demanded will prove it, and you'll be paying child support for the next 18 years. $50,000 a month, according to California guidelines for your income level, or what your income level was. Anyway." The door closed behind him with a decisive click. Margaret Stone stood and began slow clapping. "Brava, Catherine. Your father would be so proud." "The company needs rebuilding," Catherine said, shifting immediately to business. "We've lost good people who were loyal to David, but we've also been carrying dead weight. I want a full audit of every department. We're going to build something better, something that actually helps people instead of just making rich men richer." 3 weeks later, Catherine was in another board meeting when the first contraction hit. She'd been presenting the new company structure, outlining her vision for Sullivan Manning Technologies as a force for ethical innovation, when the pain shot through her back. As you can see from these projections, she paused, gripping the edge of the table. Catherine, Marcus Cooper noticed immediately. Are you all right? Another contraction, stronger this time. I believe I'm in labor. The room erupted in chaos. Board members jumping up, assistants calling for ambulances, everyone talking at once. Gentlemen, please, Catherine said through gritted teeth. We have business to conclude. Motion to formally remove David Manning's name from all company documents and rebrand as Sullivan Technologies. Catherine, we need to get you to the hospital, Margaret insisted. After the vote, Catherine said firmly, all in favor. Every hand rose, even as another contraction rolled through her. Motion carried. Now we can go to the hospital. Ooh, Marcus and Margaret flanked her to the elevator. Rachel meeting them in the lobby. Catherine had texted her sister the moment the contraction started. Only you would conduct a board vote while in labor, Rachel said, half admiring, half exasperated. Father always said to never waste a crisis, Catherine replied, then gasped as another contraction hit. At the hospital, David was already there, pacing the waiting room with flowers and what looked like a teddy bear from the gift shop. I have rights as the father, he was arguing with the desk nurse. You have no rights here, Rachel said firmly, stepping between him and the path to Catherine's room. That's my child being born. The child you questioned the paternity of in front of 12 board members. Rachel's voice could have frozen hell. The child whose mother you betrayed while she was carrying her. That child, Dr. Martinez appeared, calm and professional. Mr. Manning, the mother's wishes are paramount here. Ms. Sullivan has been clear that you're not to be admitted. I'll sue this hospital. With what money? Rachel asked sweetly. Last I heard, Jessica took what little you had left. Catherine, breathing through contractions in her delivery room, could hear the commotion. Is that David? She asked the nurse. Security is handling it, the nurse assured her. 8 hours later, at 11:59 p.m., Victoria Thomas Sullivan entered the world, screaming and perfect. 7 pounds, 3 ounces of pure potential. She's beautiful, Rachel cried, holding her niece for the first time. Dad would have been over the moon. Victoria Thomas Sullivan, Catherine said, exhausted but triumphant. Named for victories to come and the grandfather who made them possible. Margaret Stone visited the next morning, bringing not flowers but a college fund already worth $1 million. Every Sullivan woman needs a good start, she said simply. David tried to visit 3 times. Each time, security turned him away. On the 4th attempt, he brought a lawyer. Mr. Manning has paternal rights, the lawyer insisted. Eleanor Fitzgerald appeared as if summoned, because of course Catherine had called her. Mr. Manning can exercise those rights after the paternity test he demanded, and after the court determines his fitness as a father, given his recent arrest for violating a restraining order, his public intoxication, and the multiple witnesses to his emotional instability. That could take some time. This is kidnapping. This is consequences, Eleanor replied smoothly. Something Mr. Manning is unaccustomed to, but will need to learn. Catherine, watching from her hospital bed with Victoria sleeping in her arms, felt no sympathy. David had made his choices. Now he was living with them. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. She opened it to find a message from Jessica. Congratulations on the baby. For what it's worth. I'm sorry. He fooled us both. Catherine deleted it without responding. Jessica's remorse was as shallow as her affection had been. Both women had been victims of David's narcissism, but Jessica had been a willing participant in the destruction of a family. That was unforgivable. 6 weeks postpartum. Catherine walked back into Sullivan Technologies carrying Victoria in a designer baby carrier. The sight of their new CEO with her infant daughter strapped to her chest sent a clear message the Old Boys Club was officially over. The emergency board meeting had been called to address David's final attempt at revenge, a hostile takeover backed by a consortium of investors who thought a company run by a new mother would be easy pickings. David sat at the far end of the table, his borrowed suit ill-fitting, his face gaunt from stress and whatever he'd been drinking to cope. Beside him sat his new lawyer, a hungry young attorney who'd taken the case on contingency, hoping for a piece of whatever they could salvage. "Gentlemen," Catherine said, taking her seat at the head of the table while Victoria slept peacefully against her chest. "I understand there's a motion to challenge my leadership." David's lawyer stood. "My client contends that Miss Sullivan obtained her shares through fraudulent means and marital manipulation." Catherine actually smiled. "Marital manipulation? That's a fascinating choice of words from the man who spent 20 years financially abusing his wife while conducting multiple affairs." "Alleged affairs," the lawyer corrected. Catherine pulled out her tablet. "Would you like to see the evidence? I have receipts, emails, text messages, hotel records, credit card statements, all documenting at least 7 affairs over the course of our marriage." Jessica Carter was just the latest and most public. The board members shifted uncomfortably. Most of them had their own Jessica Carters hidden away. "That's irrelevant to the business at hand," David said, speaking for the first time. "Is it?" Catherine asked. "You're claiming I manipulated you, but the evidence shows you were systematically deceiving me for 2 decades. You took my strategic advice, claimed it as your own brilliance, and built your reputation on my invisible labor. Who exactly was manipulating whom?" She clicked through to her presentation. "Let me show you all something. These are the company's financials for the past 20 years, overlaid with my documented contributions." The graph was damning. Every spike in growth corresponded to Catherine's hidden involvement. Every major deal, every strategic pivot, every innovation that had built Manning Technologies into a powerhouse, all traced back to her. "This is fabricated," David insisted. "Mr. Yamamoto, you can verify the Tokyo timeline. Mr. Patterson, you have the government contract records. Mr. Chen, Singapore's Ministry of Trade can confirm my involvement." Catherine looked at each board member. "Gentlemen, I haven't hidden my contributions to protect David's ego anymore. I've simply made them visible." David's lawyer tried another approach. "My client built this company from nothing. With my money," Catherine interrupted. "Initial investment $2 million from my trust fund. Second round $5 million from my father's connections. Third round $15 million from Sullivan Enterprise subsidiaries. Shall I continue?" Victoria stirred against her chest, making a small sound. Catherine adjusted the carrier, soothing her daughter without missing a beat. "You're not fit to run this company," David exploded. "You're a new mother. You're emotional. I'm what? David hormonal, hysterical weak." Catherine's voice was steel. "I just grew a human being inside my body while orchestrating a complete corporate takeover. I conducted a board meeting while in active labor. I'm nursing an infant while destroying your pathetic coup attempt. What exactly makes me unfit?" Margaret Stone leaned forward. "Mr. Manning, do you have any actual evidence of malfeasance? Any proof that Ms. Sullivan has mismanaged this company in the 6 weeks since she took control?" "Silence, because I have evidence," Margaret continued, "that stock prices have risen 30% since she took over, that 3 major contracts have been signed, that employee satisfaction is at an all-time high." "She's buying loyalty," David accused. "I'm valuing talent," Catherine corrected. "Something you never understood. You thought fear and intimidation were leadership. They're not. They're the tools of weak men who know they don't deserve their positions." The final blow came when Jessica Carter entered the room. David's face went white. "Jessica, what are you doing here?" "Testifying," Jessica said simply. She looked at Catherine. "I've been granted immunity in exchange for my cooperation in the embezzlement investigation." "You traitorous." "Careful, David," his lawyer warned. Jessica pulled out a folder. 3 years of David Manning stealing from his own company, personal expenses charged as business costs, kickbacks from vendors, offshore accounts hiding assets from both the IRS and his wife, You were part of it, David shouted. I was, Jessica admitted, and I'm facing consequences for that. But you were the mastermind. David, you taught me everything I know about corporate fraud. You just never thought I'd document it all. Catherine watched her soon-to-be ex-husband crumble. This wasn't just about the divorce anymore. This was criminal. The FBI will be here in approximately... Eleanor checked her watch. 10 minutes. Mr. Manning, I suggest you use that time to call a criminal defense attorney. It... David stood so abruptly his chair fell backward. You orchestrated all of this. You've been planning this for years. No, David, Catherine said softly. I spent years hoping you'd be the man you pretended to be. It's only in the last few months that I accepted you never were. This isn't revenge. It's justice. Security entered the room, not company security, but federal agents with badges and stern expressions. David Manning, you're under arrest for embezzlement, wire fraud, and tax evasion. As they read him his rights, David looked at Catherine one last time. I loved you. No, Catherine said firmly. You loved what I did for you. You loved how I made you feel. You loved the reflection of yourself you saw in my eyes. But you never loved me, David, because you never even tried to know me. They led him out in handcuffs, past employees who'd gathered to watch, past journalists who'd been tipped off, past the life he'd built on lies and theft. Victoria woke then, her small cry filling the boardroom. Catherine stood, bouncing gently to soothe her. Gentlemen, I need to feed my daughter. This meeting is adjourned. When we reconvene, we'll be discussing the future of Sullivan Technologies, a future built on innovation, integrity, and inclusion. Anyone who has a problem with that is welcome to tender their resignation. No one resigned. Catherine stood in her corner office, Victoria playing in a designer playpen while she reviewed quarterly reports. Sullivan Technologies had exceeded every projection, the stock price tripling under her leadership. The company had pivoted toward ethical tech, developing applications that actually improved lives rather than just generating ad revenue. Mama, Victoria said, her first word, reaching up from her toys. That's right, baby girl. Mama's here. Catherine picked up her daughter, settling her on her hip while continuing to read. Her assistant knocked. Ms. Sullivan, your 2 o'clock is here. Send them in. The door opened to reveal not a business contact but a group of women, all in their 40s and 50s, all with the particular bearing of those who'd survived something and come out stronger. Welcome to the Wisdom Circle, Catherine said, gesturing to the conference area she'd had redesigned as a comfortable sitting room. Please make yourselves comfortable. These were the monthly dinners she'd started hosting, not networking events, but healing circles for women who discovered their worth after their marriages ended. The youngest was 38, the oldest 63. All had stories of financial abuse, of making themselves smaller, of narcissistic ex-husbands who tried to destroy them when they finally stood up. Ladies, Catherine addressed the group once they'd settled with tea and coffee. Hiding our power doesn't keep love. When we shrink ourselves, we attract men who need us small. But how do we know, asked Jennifer, whose husband had left her for his CrossFit instructor after 25 years. How do we know if they love us or what we provide? Catherine shifted Victoria to her other hip. We test them, not with games or manipulation, but with truth. We show them who we really are, our intelligence, our ambition, our power. The right person will celebrate that. The wrong person will try to diminish it. I wish I'd known that 30 years ago, said Patricia, whose husband had hidden assets in 12 countries during their divorce. We know it now, Catherine said, and we're teaching our daughters. Victoria will never believe she needs to be less to be loved. Her phone buzzed with a scheduled reminder. David's supervised visitation was tomorrow, twice a month. He got 2 hours with Victoria at a court-appointed facility. He'd shown up to exactly 3 visits in 6 months. After the Wisdom Circle dispersed, Catherine drove to the cemetery where her father was buried. She brought Victoria often, wanting her daughter to know where she came from, even if she'd never meet the man who'd made it all possible. "Dad," she said, standing before the marble headstone with Victoria in her arms, "I finally understood your last words. Never apologize for being powerful. I spent 20 years apologizing, making myself smaller, easier to digest. No more." The wind chimes on a nearby tree sang in the Palo Alto breeze, a sound that always reminded her of childhood, of safety, of being loved for exactly who she was. "Your granddaughter will be different," Catherine continued. "She'll know her worth from day one. She'll never dim her light for anyone's comfort." Victoria reached for the flowers Catherine had brought, babbling happily. "Some stories end with weddings," Catherine said, adjusting her daughter's sun hat. "Mine began with a divorce. I lost 20 million in community property that was mine anyway, but I gained 500 million in possibility. More importantly, I gained myself." Her phone rang. Fortune magazine. "Ms. Sullivan, we're calling to inform you that you've been named CEO of the Year." Catherine smiled, unsurprised. "Thank you. I'll have my assistant coordinate the interview." She ended the call and looked at Victoria. "We did it. Baby girl. We're building something real, something that matters." Rachel's car pulled up, her sister arriving for their weekly dinner. "How's my favorite niece?" she called out. "Your only niece is perfect," Catherine replied. "How was the board meeting at the foundation?" "Approved all your proposals. The Sullivan Foundation will be funding women's shelters, legal aid for divorce proceedings, and financial literacy programs." Rachel took Victoria, cooing at her. "This little one's trust fund is also fully established. She'll have choices, real choices." They drove home together, to the house that had always been Catherine's, though David had never known it. She'd redecorated, removing every trace of him, filling the spaces with art her father had collected, books she'd hidden, the life she'd kept secret for 2 decades. That evening, as she rocked Victoria to sleep, Catherine thought about transformation. Not the kind that happened overnight, not the kind that came from makeovers or self-help books, but the deep, fundamental change that came from finally choosing yourself. "Sweet girl," she whispered to her sleeping daughter, "your inheritance isn't just money. It's the knowledge that you are enough, exactly as you are. It's the certainty that anyone who asks you to be less doesn't deserve you at all." The baby sighed in her sleep, content and safe. Catherine stood at the window, looking out at Silicon Valley's lights twinkling below. Somewhere out there, David was probably in his studio apartment, working his middle management job, sending his court-mandated child support payments, living with the consequences of his choices. She felt no satisfaction in his downfall, no joy in his misery. She felt something better: indifference. He was simply no longer relevant to her story. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. She almost deleted it, then saw the preview. "This is Amanda Patterson. You don't know me, but my husband is on your board. I need help." Catherine typed back, "Wisdom Circle meets first Tuesday of every month. You're welcome." Because that was the real transformation, not just saving yourself, but reaching back to pull other women up. Not just escaping the cage, but showing others where the door was. "The Sullivan women rise again," Catherine said to the night, her father's words echoing across time. "And this time, we're taking everyone with us." Victoria stirred, opened her eyes, and smiled at her mother. In that smile was a future where women didn't have to choose between love and power, where financial independence wasn't a luxury but an expectation, where little girls grew up knowing their worth was non-negotiable. Catherine smiled back. "That's my girl. Strong like your mama. Stronger, actually. You'll never have to hide." The grandfather clock chimed midnight, marking the end of one day and the beginning of another. Catherine Sullivan no longer Manning. Never again Murphy stood in her truth, her power, her complete and absolute freedom. Some women's stories ended with weddings. Hers had truly begun with a divorce, and what a beginning it was. The settlement had been worth 20 million in community property. But her freedom, her reclaimed identity, her daughter's unlimited future, those were worth every penny of the 500 million she'd hidden, every moment of the 20 years she'd waited, every tear she'd shed in silence. Catherine Sullivan had played the long game, and she'd won everything. 5 years later, Sullivan Technologies rang the opening bell at the New York Stock Exchange. Catherine stood on the platform with Victoria, now a confident 5-year-old who asked intelligent questions about everything she saw. "Mama, why are all those people down there?" Victoria asked, pointing at the trading floor. "They're buying and selling pieces of companies, sweetheart, like trading cards, but for grown-ups with too much money," Catherine explained, making her daughter giggle. David had been released from minimum security prison 6 months ago. He'd served 3 years for embezzlement, his millionaire ex-husband status making him a cautionary tale in business schools across the country. He now worked as a consultant for a small firm in Portland, teaching others about ethical business practices. The irony wasn't lost on anyone who knew the story. He'd sent exactly 18 child support payments before his arrest, and the court had garnished his wages ever since. Victoria had met him exactly 4 times in 5 years. She called him the sad man when she talked about him at all. "Ms. Sullivan," the NYSE president said, "would you like to say a few words before ringing the bell?" Catherine stepped to the microphone, Victoria on her hip. "5 years ago, I discovered that the life I'd built was a lie. My husband of 20 years had betrayed me while I was 8 months pregnant. I could have crumbled. Instead, I chose to build—" The crowd was silent, listening. "Sullivan Technologies isn't just another tech company. We're proof that women supporting women isn't just a hashtag, it's a business model. 70% of our executives are women. We provide on-site childcare, unlimited maternity and paternity leave, and pay equity that's verified by third-party audits." Applause rippled through the room. "We're also proof that midlife transformation isn't a crisis, it's an opportunity. I was 42 when my marriage ended, 43 when I took over a failing company, and 48 as I stand here today, ringing this bell with my daughter, showing her that women don't have to choose between success and family." She lifted Victoria higher. "Ring it with me, baby." Together, they rang the bell that marked Sullivan Technologies' IPO at $2 billion. Later, at the celebration dinner, Catherine stood with her inner circle. Rachel, now president of the Sullivan Foundation; Margaret Stone, chairman of the board; Eleanor Fitzgerald, chief legal counsel; Marcus Cooper, CFO. All the people who'd believed in her when she'd finally chosen to believe in herself. "A toast," Margaret said, raising her champagne, "to Catherine Sullivan, who proved that the best revenge isn't living well, it's living authentically." "To the women supporting women who made this possible," Catherine countered, "and to the next generation who won't have to hide their light." Victoria, drinking apple juice from a champagne flute, raised her glass too. "To Mama." The room erupted in warm laughter. Catherine's phone buzzed with a message from the Wisdom Circle group chat, now 500 women strong across the country. "Watching you ring that bell, we're all crying. Thank you for showing us the way." She typed back, "You showed yourselves the way. I just turned on the lights." Jessica Carter had reinvented herself too, in her own way. After testifying against David, she'd served 6 months house arrest and paid massive fines. She now worked as a cautionary speaker at business conferences, talking about the cost of compromising integrity for ambition. Catherine had received one email from her, a genuine apology that Catherine had read and deleted without response. Some bridges, once burned, couldn't be rebuilt. As the evening wound down, Catherine stood on the balcony overlooking Manhattan, Victoria asleep in her arms. The city lights sparkled below, each one representing dreams, ambitions, struggles, triumphs. "You did it, Katie," Rachel said, joining her. "Dad would be so proud." "I think he knew," Catherine said softly. "I think he knew I'd need to be broken before I could become whole. That's why he structured the trust the way he did. Why he made sure I'd have resources when I was ready to use them. The ultimate long game." Rachel agreed. Very Thomas Sullivan. A text came through from David. He still tried, occasionally, to insert himself into their lives. Saw the NYSE news? Congratulations. V looks beautiful. Catherine showed it to Rachel, who snorted. The audacity! He's her father, Catherine said simply. That will never change. But he's nothing to me now. Not even worth the energy of anger. She deleted the message without responding. The financial press would write about this day for years. The billionaire divorcee who'd transformed a scandal into an empire. The woman who'd turned her narcissistic ex-husband's betrayal into a blueprint for success. The CEO who'd proved that women over 40 weren't disappearing. They were just getting started. But for Catherine, standing there with her daughter in her arms and her sister by her side, the real victory was simpler. She was free. Free to be brilliant without apology. Free to be powerful without shame. Free to be visible without fear. The divorce settlement had been worth $20 million. The company was now worth $2 billion. But her freedom, her daughter's future, the thousands of women who'd found their own power through her story, that was priceless. Come on, Rachel said. Let's get this little one to bed. Tomorrow you have a conference call with Tokyo, a board meeting at noon, and dinner with the president's economic advisor. Catherine smiled. Just another day in the life of a woman who refused to disappear. They walked back inside, where their chosen family waited. No one mentioned David Manning anymore. He'd become what he'd always feared most irrelevant. A footnote in someone else's success story. Catherine Sullivan, on the other hand, had become exactly what she'd always been, hidden beneath 20 years of calculated diminishment, extraordinary, and she was just getting started. Catherine Sullivan learned what millions of women discover, that sometimes losing everything you thought you wanted reveals everything you were meant to become. Her marriage was worth $20 million in community property, but her freedom was worth $500 million in possibility. And her daughter Victoria would inherit both fortune and wisdom, never knowing a world where women had to choose between love and power. The Sullivan legacy continued, stronger for being tested, brighter for being hidden, and infinitely more powerful for finally being free.